Your grandmother's kitchen scales had a set of little iron weights that sat in a row, and she balanced the flour against them by eye, and she never once in her life weighed a thing wrong. The scales in your kitchen now run on a battery, and when the battery dies, the whole thing is thrown in the bin. Something happened to the things that filled a British kitchen, and by the time we reach number 8 on this list, you're going to hear about a machine so overbuilt, so absurdly, gloriously well made, that the very same one your mother wedding listed in 1973 is still creaming butter and sugar in somebody's kitchen this afternoon, 50 years on. These are 8 things every mum's kitchen had in 1973, and the story of why they disappeared. Number 1. The Kenwood chef. On the worktop, heavy as an anvil, in a color that matched nothing else, stood the Kenwood chef, and it was the proudest possession in the whole kitchen. A young Englishman named Kenneth Wood had launched it in 1950 at the Ideal Home exhibition in London, a single, powerful machine with a whole family of attachments, and by 1973, it was on the wedding list of every bride in the land. What almost nobody remembers is how completely it was built to last. The body was metal, the gears were metal, the motor was made with a generosity that no accountant would permit today, and it did not so much run as growl, a deep, confident sound that meant a cake was coming. What everyone remembers is that sound, and the great bowl turning, and the beater going round, and a child dragging a finger round the bowl afterwards for the raw cake mix. Kenwood built those machines in Britain for decades. Then, in 1989, the company invested in its first factory in China, and in 2001, it was sold to an Italian firm, and the chef your mother owned outlived the very way it was made. The next thing on the cooker could take your ceiling off. Number 2. The Prestige pressure cooker. On the back ring of the cooker sat the pressure cooker, a heavy aluminum pot with a locking lid and a little weight on the top that jiggled and hissed, and it was, to a small child, the single most frightening object in the entire house. What everyone remembers is the sound, that furious rattling hiss, building and building, the steam screaming out of the valve, and your mother's warning never, ever to touch it, and the dark family legend, told in every street, of someone's stew ending up on the ceiling. But it was a wonder, in truth. In the years of strikes and rising prices, when a cheap, tough cut of meat was all a family could afford, the pressure cooker turned it tender in a fraction of the time and a fraction of the fuel. A stew in 20 minutes, a pudding steamed in half an hour, the whole thing driven by nothing but heat and pressure, and a mother who knew exactly how to handle it. The modern kitchen grew nervous of anything that hissed, and the electric slow cooker took its place, gentle and quiet and slow. The next things stood in a row and told you what was inside them. Number 3. The Cornishware jars. On the shelf, in a row, the storage jars in their unmistakable blue and white stripes, and on each one, in plain letters, a single word: flour, sugar, tea, coffee. This was Cornishware, made by a firm called T.G. Green in the village of Church Gressley in Derbyshire, a pottery founded all the way back in 1864 by a man named Thomas Goodwin Green. The famous blue and white stripes had first appeared in the 1920s, made by a clever trick of turning the pot on a lathe to scrape bands of blue away and reveal the white beneath, and a salesman said the colors reminded him of the Cornish sky and sea, and the name stuck. What everyone remembers is that these jars were not decoration. They were used every single day, the flour jar going into the mixing bowl, the tea caddy warmed by the pot beside it. They lasted for generations and were handed down like heirlooms. And then, in 2007, after 143 years, the Derbyshire pottery closed its doors, and the striped jars that had stood in British kitchens for the best part of a century were, for a time, made no more. The next thing measured out a nation's baking. Number 4. The Tala Cook's Dry Measure. Hanging on a hook or standing in the cupboard, a cone of cream and red enameled metal, and it was the cleverest little thing in the kitchen. Down the inside were printed lines and words, and against each line a different ingredient. So many ounces of flour to this mark, so much sugar to that one, rice and currants and breadcrumbs, each to their own line. What almost nobody under a certain age remembers is how a mother baked in 1973, which was largely without weighing anything at all, because the Tala measure did it for her. You poured the flour into the flour line, the sugar to the sugar line, and you had your Victoria sponge measured out in seconds, with never a scale in sight. It was designed for a busy woman who baked every week, who made the cakes and the pastry and the puddings from memory, and needed no recipe book, only this cone of enameled metal that held the proportions of 100 favorite recipes on its inside. It still exists, quietly, but the everyday baking it was made for has faded from most homes. Before we go on, I want to ask you something. One of these things is not really a thing in your memory. It is a smell. A cake in the oven on a wet afternoon, your mother's back to you, the mixing bowl waiting. Tell me in the comments, which one just brought her kitchen back? I read every single one. The next thing balanced the flour against iron. Number 5. The kitchen scales with the weights. On the worktop, the proper scales, a metal balance with a pan on one side and a flat platform on the other, and beside them, in a neat row from the big one down to the tiny one, the iron weights. This was how you weighed before batteries, before digital anything. You put the weights you wanted on one side and added flour to the pan until the two sides balanced, and a good cook could read that balance to the last quarter ounce. The name on so many of them was Salter, a firm that had been making scales and springs in the Black Country since the 18th century. What everyone remembers is the weights themselves, cold and heavy in a small hand, kept in a particular drawer, and the little job a child was given of fetching the 2-ounce weight, and the satisfying moment when the two pans came level and hung there, perfectly still. They never needed a battery. They never broke. They weighed as truly on their last day as on their first, and a great many are weighing still. The next thing kept the family's bread. Number 6. The enamel bread bin. In the corner of the worktop, the bread bin, enameled metal in cream or pale green, with a lid that lifted or a front that dropped down, and inside it the loaf, wrapped in its waxed paper, and the bread knife kept close by. What everyone remembers is that bread was bought fresh, and often, a proper loaf that went stale in days because it had nothing in it to stop it, and the bread bin was where it lived, and the smell, when you lifted the lid, was the smell of the kitchen itself. And nothing was wasted, of course, for the stale end of the loaf became the bread and butter pudding, or the breadcrumbs kept in a jar, or the toast under the grill in the morning. The bread bin was the small daily heart of a kitchen that fed a family on very little and threw almost nothing away. The next thing was the table you sat around. Number 7. The Formica table. In the middle of the kitchen, the table with the Formica top, a bright, hard-wearing plastic surface in a pattern of boomerangs or flowers or simple speckled color, very often with legs of shining chrome. What everyone remembers is that this table was the true center of the home, and it did everything. The family ate at it, and the children did their homework at it, and the pastry was rolled out on it, floured and flattened, right there on the wipe-clean top, and your mother sat at it with a cup of tea and the radio on in the quiet of the afternoon. It wiped clean with a single swipe of the cloth. It survived hot pans and spilled ink, and the endless life of a family, and it was cheerful and modern and tough as anything. It was the workbench and the dinner table and the meeting place, all in one, the surface on which the daily life of the house was actually lived. The last thing whistled you awake. Number 8. The whistling kettle. On the hob, the stovetop kettle, aluminium or enameled, with a little whistle on the spout. And in a nation that ran entirely on tea, it was very nearly the most important object in the house. You filled it, you lit the gas, and you waited, and when it boiled, the steam blew the whistle, and it screamed until someone came, and the day could not properly begin, nor any crisis be faced until it had. What everyone remembers is that whistle, rising from a moan to a shriek, and the endless procession of pots of tea it made, the tea for the morning, and the tea for the visitor, and the tea for bad news and good. The whole of British life measured out in kettles boiled on the hob. The electric kettle took over in the end, faster and quieter, and the hob went silent, and the house lost a voice it had always had. 8 things: the Kenwood chef that growled on the worktop, the pressure cooker that hissed on the ring, the Cornishware jars in their stripes, the talla measure that weighed nothing and everything, the scales with their iron weights, the enamel bread bin, the formica table where life was lived, the whistling kettle that started every day. None of them were grand, they were simply there, the working heart of a kitchen, and at the center of all of them, a mother, making a very great deal out of really rather little. We don't just remember the objects, we remember her, and the kitchen she made them work in. Which of these was in your mum's kitchen? Which just came back to you? Tell me in the comments. One thing, one memory. Subscribe, because there is a great deal more of this country left to remember.